At 2:14 a.m. on March 4, 2026, a ballistic missile carrying several hundred kilograms of high explosive impacted directly beside a residential apartment building in central Tel Aviv. No one is arguing about whether it hit. What the Israeli government will not confirm, and what I've been tracking through the blackout zones, the censored satellite tiles and the sealed streets, is where, exactly, it was aimed, because it wasn't aimed at the building. I'm going to walk you through the next 10 minutes carefully. The timeline, the targets, what's buried underneath Tel Aviv that Iran keeps trying to reach, what Israel did to Iran's equivalent facility, and then, because this conflict doesn't stay contained to the Middle East, what crude at $115 a barrel means for your utility bill, your mortgage payment, and your retirement account. That financial architecture is not a sidebar. It is the second story running underneath this entire war, and I'm not going to let it get buried the way the command bunkers are. Stay with me. The target. Most people picture Israel's military headquarters as a reinforced above-ground compound with a few hardened shelters underneath. That is not what sits beneath the Hakiria district in central Tel Aviv. What's actually there is a layered network of underground command infrastructure that Israel has been expanding for decades. 2 installations are confirmed enough to name. The first is designated Site 81, a facility estimated at roughly 6,000 square meters, electromagnetically shielded to survive electronic warfare attacks and maintain communications even if everything above ground goes dark. It was built with American engineering and American funding. The second is the Fortress of Zion. This one is newer and deeper. The New York Times was granted access and described a nerve center where approximately 70 personnel sat at multiple levels, facing wall-mounted screens, tracking live strikes in real time. During active conflict, thousands of soldiers work there around the clock. This is what the IRGC means when it announces, publicly and by name, that it is targeting underground command infrastructure in Tel Aviv. Now here's why that claim is credible. It's not credible because Iran says so. It's credible because this exact scenario already happened. In June 2025, during the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, a confirmed Iranian ballistic missile struck the North Tower of the Da Vinci apartment complex. The impact zone was immediately sealed. No cameras were permitted. The Jerusalem Post reported, in their own words, that the missile landed a stone's throw from Netanyahu's office, Building 22. Weeks after the ceasefire, the Prime Minister's office began unexplained renovations. Israeli officials never confirmed or denied damage. And here's the detail I need you to sit with. Today, Google Maps blurs the satellite imagery over that section of Tel Aviv. On Leonardo da Vinci Street, directly in front of the towers, Google does not offer Street View. Russia's Yandex Maps applies the same censorship to both imagery and location data. France 24 conducted an independent analysis and concluded that Israeli media coverage of the June 2025 Da Vinci strike was likely deliberately delayed. Haaretz waited 2 full weeks before publishing anything about the hit, and by that point, photos had already circulated online. So, Iran targeted this zone in June 2025. The damage was sealed off, the media was blocked. The satellite data is still censored today, and now, in March 2026, the IRGC is claiming it struck the same zone again. The scale. Let me give you the arithmetic of the last 10 days, because I think it's being significantly underreported in terms of sheer tonnage. On day 1, approximately 90 ballistic missiles were launched at Israel. Day 2, around 60. After that, roughly 20 per day, but the pattern isn't what it appears. The salvos are getting smaller, the warheads are getting bigger. By March 5th, according to a military source speaking to Iran's Fars news agency, Iran had launched more than 500 ballistic and cruise missiles and over 2,000 drones. The IRGC states 40% of that firepower was directed at Israel, 60% at American positions across the region, which means the United States is not a supporting actor in this conflict. It is a primary target. The White House has acknowledged this, claiming that American and Israeli operations against Iranian mobile launchers reduced incoming ballistic missile strikes by 90% between day 1 and day 6. That sounds reassuring until you look at what those remaining 10% are doing. On March 1st, the deadliest single strike of the war so far hit Beit Shemesh. A missile carrying approximately 500 kilograms of explosives collapsed an underground civilian bomb shelter accessible by 2 flights of stairs. 9 people were killed. Investigators later concluded that even a fully code-compliant shelter would not have survived a direct hit of that force. The interceptor that was fired at that missile missed. There was no mechanical failure found. The system engaged. It just didn't connect. As of March 8th, 4 confirmed major impacts have hit the Israeli home front: Tel Aviv, Beit Shemesh, Beersheba, central Israel. A total of 1,619 Israelis have been hospitalized since the war began. 87 remain in hospital beds, 4 are in critical condition. 10 Israeli civilians have been killed. I want to stay on one weapon specifically because it changes the math on everything, including the bunker targeting question. The weapon that changes everything, the Goram Shah 4, also designated K-Bar, is the most destructive confirmed weapon in Iran's ballistic inventory, first revealed in May 2023. Range, approximately 2,000 kilometers. Warhead weight, approximately 1,500 kilograms. What makes it genuinely different from a conventional ballistic missile is its cluster configuration. The warhead opens at roughly 7 kilometers altitude, releasing around 20 individual submunitions, each carrying approximately 2.5 kilograms of explosive across a massive dispersal zone. Think about what that means defensively. A conventional warhead needs a direct hit to threaten a buried facility. A cluster warhead transforms the entire surface above that facility into a kill zone, shredding ventilation systems, communications arrays, antenna clusters, and access points. You don't need to penetrate the bunker, you just need to saturate its footprint. And if those submunitions are landing within the Hakiria perimeter, the question isn't whether they reach the neighborhood, the question is whether they reach the depth. The IRGC confirmed deploying this weapon during what it designated the 19th wave of Operation True Promise, targeting central Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport, and the 27th Air Base of the Israeli Air Force with warheads weighing 1,000 kilograms. A first responder on the ground in central Israel described finding a man in his 40s lying on open grass with a severe shrapnel wound from scattered submunitions. Firefighters responded to 2 confirmed cluster munition impact zones in central Israel. Israel disputed most of the IRGC's claims, insisting its defenses intercepted every overnight missile. It did acknowledge one morning strike that hit open ground in a central town. Now here's the mirror image that both governments are pretending doesn't exist. The mirror. While Iran claims to have struck Israel's underground command structure, Israel carried out the verified version of that exact operation against Iran. On March 6, 2026, approximately 50 Israeli Air Force fighter jets dropped around 100 bombs on the underground bunker of Ali Khamenei, the facility beneath the leadership compound in central Tehran. The IDF announced total destruction. The bunker extended beneath multiple city streets and contained meeting rooms, entry points, and command chambers used by Iran's senior leadership. Israel's Unit 8200 and Unit 9900, its signals and visual intelligence branches, had spent years mapping every corridor of that facility before the strike was ordered. The footage was released. The confirmation was explicit. Iran has produced no equivalent visual evidence for its claimed strike on Israeli underground infrastructure. But the absence of proof is not the same as the absence of an event. Not when the impact area was sealed. Not when the satellite imagery is still blurred from 2025. Not when the same location was struck in June and the media was physically prevented from documenting it. Both governments are doing the same thing, hunting the other side's buried command architecture. One side showed its hand, the other sealed the evidence. The financial architecture. Crude oil has crossed $115 a barrel. I want to be specific about why, because it's not just a market number, it's a policy outcome with a direct line to your wallet. The 115 figure is the direct result of 2 simultaneous pressures: disrupted commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, which handles roughly 20% of global oil trade on any given day, and confirmed damage to Gulf state energy infrastructure from the conflict's spillover. When the strait tightens, every tanker reroutes around the Cape of Good Hope, adding approximately 15 days of transit time and significant fuel costs to each voyage. The market prices that disruption in immediately. What does 115 oil mean at ground level? In the United States, the average vehicle holds about 13 gallons. When crude rises $12 a barrel from its pre-conflict baseline, the downstream pass-through to retail gasoline is roughly 0.28 to 0.35 per gallon. That's an extra $4 to $5 every time you fill up. Multiply that across a family that drives 2 cars and commutes 5 days a week, and you're looking at a conflict surcharge of $50 to $70 a month that nobody voted for and nobody sent you a bill for. It just shows up. Utility bills are next. Natural gas prices are tracking crude with a slight lag. Residential electricity rates in regions that run on gas-fired generation are up approximately 9% since the conflict began, according to futures pricing as of early March. If you're on a fixed income, if your budget was balanced before February, it is not balanced now. And then there's the inflation channel that's slower but more damaging: food. Iran and the broader conflict region are not major wheat exporters, but the energy shock hits fertilizer costs, shipping logistics, and cold chain transport simultaneously. The downstream effect on grocery prices lags crude by about 60 to 90 days. The 115 oil you're seeing in March 2026 is going to show up in your grocery bill by May or June. The budget behind the war. The United States has now lost 7 service members across the Middle East since this conflict began. It has sunk more than 30 Iranian naval vessels, declaring Iran's navy combat ineffective. The White House has stated it needs 4 to 6 weeks to accomplish its stated objectives, without specifying what those objectives are, which is a significant accountability gap. What does 4 to 6 weeks of sustained American military operations in this theater actually cost? Based on the operational tempo visible in the public record, carrier strike group deployment, continuous air operations, cruise missile expenditure, logistic support, a reasonable daily operating cost for U.S. forces at this intensity runs between $200 million and $300 million per day. That is before any supplemental appropriation. That is before the cost of replacing Tomahawks at roughly $2 million per unit, before the cost of redeploying the hardware, before the veteran care tale that follows every extended engagement. Who is getting those contracts? Raytheon, now RTX Corporation, holds the Tomahawk production contract. Lockheed Martin holds the THAAD and Patriot system contracts. Northrop Grumman holds the B-21 program. None of these companies announced earnings surprises in February 2026. They didn't need to. The contracts were already in place. What a sustained conflict does is accelerate the existing procurement schedule, trigger options on existing agreements, and create the budget justification for the next 5-year planning cycle. Follow the money. Defense sector ETFs, specifically ITA and XR, have outperformed the S&P 500 by approximately 14 percentage points since the conflict began. Meanwhile, the domestic programs quietly absorbing the budget pressure haven't made the front pages. The supplemental appropriations being drafted to fund this operation will pull from discretionary spending, infrastructure, housing assistance, public health preparedness. These aren't conspiracy items. They're line items in a budget that only has so much room. Your portfolio in a war economy. Here's the pattern recognition piece. Not financial advice, but historical behavior across comparable conflicts. What has historically held value or appreciated during a high-intensity Middle East conflict with energy infrastructure disruption, energy sector equities, particularly integrated majors with Permian Basin or North Sea exposure. Commodities, specifically crude, natural gas, and fertilizers. Gold, which crossed $3,200 per ounce in early March 2026 as a direct flight to safety response. And short-duration U.S. Treasuries, which carry less interest rate risk than long-duration bonds in a conflict inflation environment. What gets hit? Emerging market equities with regional exposure, Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, all saw significant currency and equity pressure in the first week of this conflict. Consumer discretionary, which is the first category households cut when fuel and food costs rise, and airlines, whose fuel hedging programs have variable coverage windows. Carriers with shorter hedges are now absorbing the full $115 crude price. If you hold a standard target date retirement fund, you have indirect exposure to all of the above. A 2040 fund with standard allocation carries roughly 40% to 45% in international equities, a portion of which is emerging market and regional. You may not know what you own. Now would be a reasonable time to look. One more thing on currencies. The Iranian rial has been in free fall since the opening strikes. Anyone holding savings or business accounts denominated in regional currencies with Iran-linked exposure is watching purchasing power disappear in real time. The dollar is strengthening against most EM currencies in this environment, which sounds good if you're holding dollars, until the Fed has to respond to conflict-driven inflation with rate hikes. Because a rate hike from a conflict inflation baseline, not an overheating economy baseline, doesn't cool growth. It just raises your cost of servicing debt. If you're carrying a variable rate mortgage, a car loan tied to prime, or significant credit card debt, the chain looks like this: conflict, energy price spike, broader inflation, Fed rate response, your monthly minimum payment increases. That chain is not hypothetical, it is in motion. The human cost beneath the numbers. According to the human rights activist news agency, more than 1,300 Iranian civilians have been confirmed killed since the conflict began. 194 of them are children. Israeli intelligence estimates more than 3,000 Iranian military personnel killed since the opening strikes. Hezbollah has opened a second front from Lebanon, launching barrages at Israeli territory and clashing with Israeli ground forces near the border town of Adaisseh. The Islamic resistance in Iraq has joined the offensive with its own drone and missile strikes, expanding the geographic footprint of the conflict in ways that complicate any single ceasefire negotiation. And on March 8, 2026, Iran installed Mojtaba Khamenei, the dead supreme leader's own son, as his replacement. Iran's entire senior leadership, including the IRGC command structure, pledged allegiance immediately. That is not a footnote. That is the single most consequential command variable in this conflict right now. Iran just handed wartime authority over an active ballistic missile campaign to a man who has never held public office and has no formal military title. He inherits a war his father did not start and a missile stockpile that has already burned through a significant share of its total inventory. Whether Mojtaba Khamenei can maintain targeting discipline, logistical rhythm, and strategic coherence under sustained bombardment from both Israel and the United States is the open question that every defense ministry in the world is watching in real time. 3 paths forward. Scenario 1. Controlled drawdown. Iran's new leadership, facing a depleted missile inventory and an economy under compounding sanctions pressure, signals through back channels, likely via Oman or Qatar, which have served as intermediaries in past Iran-US exchanges, that it is willing to negotiate a de-escalation framework in exchange for a suspension of American offensive operations. The key indicator: watch for any reduction in IRGC social media claiming, when they go quiet, they're talking. Oil pulls back below $95. Markets stabilize. The rate hike cycle pauses. Scenario 2. Managed escalation. Mojtaba Khamenei, under pressure from IRGC hardliners to demonstrate legitimacy and resolve, authorizes a high-profile strike designed for maximum symbolic impact, a confirmed penetration of the Hakiria underground complex, or a strike that closes the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic for more than 72 hours. The key indicator: any strait closure lasting more than 48 hours. Crude goes past $130. Central banks face an impossible choice between fighting inflation and avoiding recession. Mortgage rates spike. The political consequences in every funding country become severe. Scenario 3. Extended war of attrition. Neither side escalates to a decisive threshold, and neither side negotiates. The conflict grinds at current intensity for months. Iran rotates leadership through the new supreme leader's inner circle. Israel maintains its air campaign. American carrier groups stay on station. The White House's 4 to 6 weeks timeline becomes a running abstraction. The key indicator: a second supplemental appropriation request from the White House before the first one clears Congress. That is the bureaucratic signal that nobody in Washington has a clean exit. What to watch: the sealed streets around the Hakiria compound. If Israeli authorities restore normal media access and the satellite imagery becomes unblurred, you'll know the bunker wasn't hit. If the blackout continues and deepens, you'll know why. Mojtaba Khamenei's first public statement, what he says, and more importantly what he doesn't say, about ceasefire conditions will tell you whether Iran's command structure is coherent enough to negotiate. Crude at $130. That is the threshold above which central bank governors in Europe and North America start making emergency policy statements. Watch for that language, and watch for the contractor announcements. RTX, Lockheed, Northrop. The quarterly earnings calls happen in April. The guidance language will tell you how long the industry expects this to run. Neither side has defined what the end of this war looks like. Neither side can verify what the other side is hiding beneath the rubble. The sealed streets, the censored maps, the media blackouts, a new supreme leader who has never given an order, and crude oil sitting at $115. This is what it looks like when a conflict metastasizes past the point where the people running it have a shared picture of how it ends. That's what I needed you to understand. Stay informed, check your exposure, and watch those 3 indicators closely.